The warring factions in Sudan have committed to facilitating humanitarian aid after nearly 7 months of fighting. But Saudi Arabia-led peace talks between the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese army have failed to secure a full-on ceasefire. South Africa's ambassador to South Sudan, Advocate Mahlodi Muofhe, joins us now for a discussion, really. Advocate, a very good evening to you on the situation in Sudan. We've spoken to you because you've been based next door, basically, to the country. Why is it that at this point it appears still so difficult to secure a full-on ceasefire?
Yeah, you can ask that question again. President Salva Kiir Mayardit has been doing his utmost best to ensure that there is peace in Sudan. You'll recall that he was the deputy president of Sudan before South Sudan was birthed. So he knows the two generals very well. Even before the outbreak, he brought them to South Sudan. There was what we call the Juba Peace Accord. But unfortunately, in some of these things, they are so unpredictable. Soon after the Juba Peace Accord, then the war broke in Sudan, and it is really creating a humanitarian crisis because South Sudan is the nearest country. So people all flock to South Sudan, and it is becoming a serious problem there because South Sudan on its own, it has its own humanitarian problems. But many people fled to South Sudan. There are South Sudanese who lived in Sudan, and because South Sudan is preparing for an election next year in December, there has been a call for South Sudanese who are outside South Sudan to come back. So there are generally South Sudanese who are coming back to South Sudan. So, South Sudan is basically flooded by many people who are now in South Sudan. Mm-hmm. South Sudanese themselves who are coming back home because they want to vote next year, and also those who are coming back because they are displaced by this war in Sudan.
So, do you expect then, Advocate, that this agreement now between the RSF and the army in Sudan, at least as far as humanitarian aid and the movement thereof is concerned, that will help stem or stop the further displacement of Sudanese people?
I can't hear you well, Tendekile. What were you saying?
I was asking, Advocate, if you believe at this stage that this agreement on humanitarian conditions will help to stop or even reduce the extent to which Sudanese people are being displaced at the moment.
Well, the humanitarian assistance is most welcome. But remember, it is done through international organizations, and even some of us as individuals. I remember when it started, the First Lady in South Sudan held a fundraising event where we raised money. If my memory serves me well, I think we raised something like $600,000 at the time. So the humanitarian assistance is most welcome, but the issue is that the leaders who are at each other's throats must get to the table and resolve the issue. Sudan now, is grounded really, so some rebuilding must be done, and South Sudan has got to be carrying all this burden of ensuring that people from South Sudan who are coming from Sudan coming to South Sudan are well looked after. But South Sudan has got its own problems. But the president of South Sudan, President Salva Kiir Mayardit, I think I read even last week, he had gone to see the president of Egypt. They were talking, among other things, the problems in Sudan. So I am hopeful that at some point there will be some solution. I know that even our President Ramaphosa is also interested in ensuring that there is some kind of peace there in Sudan. So I'm sure very soon something will happen.
But ultimately, these sides, they've gone to Saudi Arabia now several times for these negotiations in Jeddah. Are they holding out on an agreement on a ceasefire, because both sides still believe that they can still achieve all-out victory? I mean, earlier this week, there were reports suggesting that the RSF, for example, was close to taking over all of Darfur, which we know has had its fair share of crises over the last 2 decades.
Yeah, you'll recall, Tembekile, that Sudan has always been led through coups all the time. So up until that someone gives in, I'm sure they'll keep on trying to fight. But it is entirely up to the leaders in Africa, to get in and make sure that the two leaders, the two generals, stop this war so that we can start rebuilding Sudan. And it's critical in the sense that in South Sudan is busy preparing for its first democratic election in December next year. But with all these things, South Sudan now has got to carry the burden of ensuring that humanitarian materials are basically sourced out so that people coming from Sudan, including retainees, South Sudanese who had returned to South Sudan, are all well catered for.
Right.
So, yeah, it is a bit problematic in that score. But whichever way, at some point, the problem is going to be resolved.
How big a risk, though, Advocate, is there at this stage of the crisis in Sudan falling off the global radar because of the multiple crises in the world at the moment, not least of which what's happening in Gaza and the Russia-Ukraine situation?
I think African leaders must talk. We have the AU, which must be at the center of ensuring that there are engagements, serious engagements, really. Everywhere in Africa where there are problems. It's not only in Sudan. I mean, in Niger, these things can spread all over the show, So it's important that the AU become very strong and be seen to be leading. But I know that our president is really worried about what is happening there, engages there, and I know that President Salva Kiir, Mayardit, is also worried about what is happening there. We can only pray that at some point this matter will be attended to. We have lost so many lives there. And if we are rebuilding South Sudan, and as we are rebuilding South Sudan, Sudan collapses, it does not make sense.
Advocate Mahlodi Muofhe, South Africa's ambassador to South Sudan, speaking to us about the crisis in neighboring Sudan tonight.